Thank you, Dr. Bowman. It's quite an honor to be part of the activities around the 100th convocation, and in particular to moderate such a distinguished group of past and present leaders of the University of Winnipeg. I'll introduce them in more detail as I call on each to speak to our topic, which of course is the future of higher education in Manitoba. The subtitle, I was thinking as I prepared some introductory remarks, might be The University and the Curse of Interesting Times. And by interesting times, looking at post-secondary education, of course, and this is across the country, we immediately think of the challenges that are present and ongoing facing the entire sector. We know, of course, the challenges in resources, which one might say are ongoing for post-secondary institutions, but particularly sharpened by the budget difficulties that are faced by the main funder of the university. We also know the challenge of new modes of education that are being introduced, online education, co-op programs, experiential learning, and what that means for trying to preserve the core of traditional education while also venturing into those new areas. And we know that the challenges that this university has already taken major steps in addressing, at the same time trying to become more globally oriented and engage more directly with the community surrounding the university. And finally, there's a challenge absolutely vital for the future of this province, as well as for all of the post-secondary institutions, of ensuring that sectors of the population that previously have not been represented to the same degree on our campuses get the benefits of a higher education. And again, the efforts that have been undertaken at this university, particularly in the last decade, have already made major strides in addressing that challenge. Now, putting all that together, as I said, the Chinese proverb talks about the curse of interesting times. But I venture to say that with our panelists this morning, I think all of those challenges at the same time represent both stimulus and opportunity. And I think based on the history of this institution, and quite a bit of this was discussed at the convocation dinner last night, the challenges that have been faced in the past, the times in which the university has had to go back to its core values, to innovate, to reinvent itself. That's been a continual part of the history of the University of Winnipeg. And in particular, as Dr. Bessner mentioned last night, in the last decade, the tremendous amount of dynamism that's been generated, taking the university from a very dire set of circumstances to what we see today. And by that I mean not just the change in the campus, but I think, and to me, even more importantly, the faces on the campus that you see today. So I think that provides a platform and a basis for confidence in looking ahead to the future and looking to how the university can navigate through those challenges, innovating, but as I said, also remaining true to its core values. And each of the panelists has been asked to speak to that in the constrained space of 10 minutes. And then after that, we'll have a question and answer session in which the people can also engage the panelists either collectively or individually as you like. I'm going to call upon our first speaker, Dr. Hanen, one of the past presidents of the university. Dr. Hanen served as the 4th president and vice chancellor of the University of Winnipeg, spanning the decade from 1989 to 1999. In her role as president, Hanen was instrumental in the advancement of the University of Winnipeg's growth and development strategy. During her tenure, notable accomplishments include the passing of the University of Winnipeg Act, which had been long sought after the creation of the university, the establishment of a Bachelor of Education program, the openings of both the Bulman Student Center and the acclaimed Eckhart-Gramate Hall. A staunch believer in the importance of liberal arts and science education at the undergraduate level, the Marsha Hanen Award for Excellence in Creating Community Awareness was established to recognize the activities of faculty and staff which reinforce the value of a liberal education and expand understanding and respect for the University of Winnipeg. Dr. Hanen's exemplary work has made her the recipient of many grants, awards, honors, including induction into the Order of Canada and a fellowship in law and philosophy at Harvard University. Dr. Hanen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm delighted to be here, and it's lovely to see so many of you whom I recognized and was just so pleased to find in the audience. It's lovely. I'm hoping for a lot of lively exchange in this, and so I'm not going to go on at great length. But I think that one of the important themes that the chairman has mentioned, and it's really overarching, it's not just innovation, but it's change of all kinds. And that has, as we all know, been going on forever. It's not new that there's change, and this university particularly has gone through many, many, many decades of all kinds of changes. But one thing that troubles me, and it's just something I'd like us to think about, change is inevitable. There's no doubt about that, and we all have to accept that. But not all change is good. And so the real question is, what change is thoughtful? And what change is sound? And what change is compelling? So I think one of the problems that we have about change is that we tend to ask, how will we change? It's not just the how, it's the what, it's the when, and it's the why. And you may think it's very silly to say it's the when, but you know, it really, certain things at certain times are right, and they might not have been right 2 years earlier, and they might not be right 2 years later. And so it's important to think about those three things, I think, the what, the when, and the why. I think not all change involves innovation. And so again, it's important to think about what kinds of innovations are important and what kinds can we live without. As to curriculum, you know, the business of more and more technology and more methods of instruction and all kinds of things like that, those all are things that can be incorporated and have been at this university into what this university is and has been. So the kind of alteration, I think, is something that can be, you can live peaceably together with. You know, it's still even all right to have lectures, and it's all right to have students in classrooms. It's okay. It's fine to have technology, and it's fine to have experiential learning and all kinds of other things. I mean, none of those is a bad thing, but I think that we shouldn't suppose that those things supplant everything that's gone before. I think maybe I'll just stop there and hope that others say things that then we can all respond to. But I thought I'd start with that particular theme. I suppose one other thing I should mention, and that's funding. Funding is something that's been a challenge at all universities, still is. It's been a particular challenge here through the years, many, many, many funding issues. I mean, I can remember that I spent nearly 10 years trying to persuade the government that our grant was disproportionately smaller than those of the other universities. And we got a very good hearing, but nothing happened for a very long time. And shortly before I left the university, I was delighted to get a call from the Minister of Finance. And he said, well, I wanted to tell you that we're going to do what you asked, and we're going to increase the grant. We're going to put an increase into the base of the grant. What had happened before was that there would be some increases, but they were one-time increases. And he said, we're going to put it into the base. That had always been part of our argument. And he named a figure, and he said, now, I believe that that's what you said you needed. And I said, well, it's about a fifth of what we need. But whatever it is, we'll take it and hope that it can be expanded over time. And of course, you know what that sort of thing means. It means that there's rivalry, and other universities are not at all pleased that there's any kind of what they think of as special treatment for one university. And so it fairly soon became apparent that they weren't going to try that again. And it's too bad, I think, because that gap still exists, always has existed, and will continue to exist unless something is done about it. On the other hand, we all have to know that things about funding have changed, and it is necessary for us all to think about how we can manage our own futures. It's not going to come from somewhere else, and so we're going to need to be creative about how we manage the kind of funding that we need. And you know, this is not just universities. I mean, I'm very involved with arts organizations in my current life. Same thing, absolutely the same thing. We know that the government grant is not going to increase. This is the Victoria Symphony I'm speaking of, and we get grants at the municipal level, the provincial level, and the federal level. And none of them increase. Some of them go down. And we've just learned that we have to do it ourselves. So I think that's something else that it's important for us to think about in terms of innovation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hanen. I think those, particularly those two issues of resources and also the impact of technology will come up many times as we go through the panel. The next panelist to speak is the third president and vice chancellor of the University of Winnipeg, Dr. Robin Farquhar, served from 1981 to 1989. Dr. Farquhar commonly referred to the University of Winnipeg as an urban university. He was passionate about the university's engagement in local issues and events, and the recruitment of a larger student body, the development of outreach programs that would involve as many members of the larger community as possible. His dedication to the establishment of an expanded university left a strong imprint on this campus, notably the Athletic Centre, which is regarded as one of the finest such university facilities in Canada, but has also become a hub for local sports of all levels in Winnipeg. In honor of Dr. Farquhar's steadfast commitment to university governance and autonomy, the Robin H. Farquhar Award for Excellence in Contributing to Self-Governance was established in 1989 by the Board of Regents. Dr. Farquhar has chaired the Canadian Bureau for International Education and the Commonwealth Council for Educational Administration. He's an author of over 100 published books and articles. He's now a well-respected international consultant in matters relating to higher education, policy, and management. Dr. Farquhar.
Thank you very much, Paul. I must say I'm delighted to be in this room. It didn't look like this when I was here. That's a fabulous setting. What a great spot to have some thoughtful conversation this morning. I was rather proud of myself this morning because I was able to walk from the Fort Garry Hotel over here, and I found my way here. I could still find my way to the University of Winnipeg after more than a quarter of a century, but I didn't recognize it when I got here. Things have changed a lot, and it's looking good. Lloyd, I think you've got a pretty tremendous legacy that you're going to be leaving here, one that sort of gives some credibility to those that came before you and tried to get a few things started. You've actually delivered, and I thank you for that. The subject that we've been asked to say something about is the future of higher education in Manitoba. I think that's it, yeah. I'm not sure that the future of higher education in Manitoba is any different from the future of higher education anywhere else in Canada or in North America or even in the Western world. I've spent, as Paul mentioned, I've spent about the past 15 years now since I finished working as a university president, trying to help people in various countries around the world as they develop their management practices and their university policies. And one of the questions that they're constantly asking me for help with is what strategic focus should I be concentrating on in my university? We all know that no university can do everything. We all know that what universities need to do varies from time to time, place to place, and institution to institution. And so you need to look at each institution to see where its strategic focus ought to be. And I interpret the question as being, what should the strategic focus of universities in Manitoba be right now? And in particular, I think, at the University of Winnipeg. When you think about the strategic foci that universities have pursued in recent years, you think immediately of the research-intensive university. This has been a very popular focus among the major private universities and the larger public universities in the US, among the larger universities in Canada in particular. You think of the entrepreneurial university. That's the university that concentrates on commercializing the results of its research and development, in particular, on making money in order to sustain the various activities that it's responsible for. That's particularly popular right now in Europe, in Western Europe especially. You think of the virtual university. This is popular in settings such as Africa, where the demand for university education has absolutely exploded as the requirement for basic education is extended through to the high school level. You got more and more people coming that expect an opportunity to pursue higher education. And the capacity of those countries to support the infrastructure for that is very, very limited, and so you need to do a lot virtually, largely through online. And you think of the engaged university. This is the university that believes it has a role in influencing policy, in shaping the development and the direction of its own community, the community that it serves. Some degree of social engineering, some degree of community development. Universities that follow the model of engaged university take that as their strategic focus. And I suppose, as Paul kind of suggested when he introduced me, that was probably the strategic focus that I was most comfortable with during my tenure in this presidency during the 1980s. The fact is that all universities need to be engaged in all four of those things in one way or another. It's just a matter of where the emphasis should lie and how the emphasis should change from time to time. What I would like to propose, and I won't take more than the 10 minutes I'm supposed to have, is that the appropriate strategic focus for the future of universities in Manitoba, and particularly for the University of Winnipeg at this time, is the student-oriented university. And that may sound strange because it's not all that cool anymore when you talk about research intensivity and community engagement and virtual delivery and entrepreneurialism. Student-focused, that's old stuff. We always used to do that. That's all we used to do. What are you talking about? But I'll tell you why I think that strategically an emphasis on the needs of students is probably a very smart bet. Happily, I think that particular focus falls right in the wheelhouse of the University of Winnipeg. It is one of the very few universities in Canada that has been traditionally known as an institution that highly values its education function. Now, of course, it values its community service function, it values its research function, but it's particularly known for having valued its education function. And that means student orientation. So if I'm right, the U of W is in pretty good shape because it's got that tradition to build on and to talk about. My argument is this. There are certain trends underway now, which Marsha has correctly mentioned, that kind of lead me to that sort of conclusion. First of all, the demand for education, higher education, both by students and by employers, is going to continue to increase. I don't think there's any question about that. Some people say that universities are outmoded, you don't need a degree anymore. What good is a degree? You ought to go and get your post-secondary. I don't believe that. Secondly, the application of increasingly efficient and effective information and communication technology is going to expand, going to continue to expand. There are going to be more and more tools in the ITC area that we can, ICT area that we can exploit in the interest of the student. And these tools are going to be available. And thirdly, as Marsha said, government funding for the basic operations of public universities as a proportion of their total revenue is going to continue to decline. And one of the ways, unavoidably, that gap is going to be made up is through tuition fees. If you're going to find ways to increase your income through tuition fees, you're going to have to be very attractive to universities, because students mean dollars. And if you're not attracting students, if you're not doing something they value, if you're not providing the programs they want, and you're not delivering the services they need, and you're not hosting the amenities that they require, they're not going to come. And if they don't come, their dollars aren't going to come. And so it just makes sense to put a major emphasis on meeting the needs of your students and being a student-oriented institution. The implications of that, I think, are that for financial reasons then, as I've already intimated, tuition fees will continue to rise. Or let me say, well, I was going to say tuition revenue will continue to rise. That can happen simply by expanding the number of students, but I think tuition fees are going to continue to rise too. And I think universities have a major responsibility to influence government policy and create policy themselves that provide student aid programs to ensure that those who can't afford the higher fees can still benefit from study here. Revenue from the higher fees should be used to help people who can't afford the higher fees to study. So that's financial or economic reasons. For political reasons, an implication of those causes I mentioned, I think that for political reasons, what money does come from provincial governments will increasingly be targeted to the educational function of universities. Provincial governments make good noise about the research function of universities and the community service function of universities, but the bread and butter of universities from the provincial government's point of view is providing higher education to the students of that province. And it's the federal government that does most of the heavy lifting in research funding, and increasingly probably it's the city government that is going to have to do more and more in terms of supporting the community service function. Provincial government is going to increasingly concentrate on supporting the education function. So that's another reason why I think student orientation is going to make some sense. Thirdly, for social reasons, that support will be directed, I think, towards stimulating socioeconomic and ethnocultural and geophysical diversity among students. Not only is the province going to want to see its young people get good opportunities for higher education, the education function, but it's also going to want to see those groups that have been rather, somewhat neglected, given special attention in that regard. Fourthly, I think an implication of the causes I mentioned is, as I said, there's going to be great competition for students. Because students mean dollars, all universities are going to want them. They do now, but increasingly, because their need for their revenue is going to increase. And so there's going to be huge competition. And that competition is going to be based on what people understand about the quality of education you're offering, the quality of teaching that you're doing, the quality of learning that is taking place on your campus. And so you better be student-oriented in order to elevate those levels of quality so you can compete for the students who bring the dollars you need to keep operating. I think that there will continue to remain a need for entrepreneurialism in universities, but I think some of this entrepreneurial energy and creativity will have to be focused not so much on commercializing research to make money, on incubation, on tech transfer, etc., but more on creative approaches to improving your teaching, creative approaches to attracting students. That's where the entrepreneurial energy of a university must increasingly be focused, because you need students, and students need you, or students need higher education. And the final implication of that is that my conclusion, for survival purposes, for a continued meaningful role in society, universities need to become more student-oriented than they are now. And I'm going to quit there because I've tried to come full circle and say that not only do I think it's just a nice thing to say, it's always nice to say you're student-oriented, I think there are very strong, persuasive economic, political, and social reasons for universities to do that. And what that means is that universities, I mean, you can't just say you're doing it. You have to develop reward systems that provide incentives for your academic staff to teach creatively, to teach attractively, to exploit the technology that's available to improve what it is and how they teach. You need to do things with your infrastructure. You need to do things with your curriculum. You need to do things with your community relations, that is your PR. You need to do things with your alumni. You need to do things with your student association. There are all sorts of practical things that those who are managing universities need to take initiative on in order to become student-oriented or more student-oriented. It just doesn't happen by saying that's what we are. You actually have to take action. You must give it a priority. It must become a strategic focus. And so my little opening message is that I think the future of higher education in Manitoba will involve, if the universities are to be successful, a greater strategic focus on student orientation as opposed to some of the other foci that have been hot buttons over the past decade or so. Thank you.
Well, Thanks, Dr. Farquhar, and particularly thanks for, there's some very bold suggestions about the choices that universities face, and I think a very bold statement about what choice this university should make that I'm sure we'll come back to in the questions. Our next speaker is Dr. H. Sanford Riley, who has served as the Past-Chancellor of the University of Winnipeg. In fact, served for 3 full terms, Bob, from 2000 to 2009. And during that time, the University of Winnipeg underwent a remarkable period of growth and development. Dr. Riley was also the founding chairperson of the University of Winnipeg Foundation Board of Directors, launching and overseeing the most ambitious capital campaign in University of Winnipeg's history, which raised an unprecedented $135 million and allowed for a campus renaissance. Dr. Riley's commitment to the University of Winnipeg has also been personal. His generous donation established the H. Sanford Riley Fellowships in Canadian History, and in June 2009, the H. Sanford Riley Centre for Canadian History opened, bringing together associations and organizations committed to researching the history of Canada from Indigenous and colonial times to the present. In May 2013, the important Oral History Centre took root within this institution, and for his ongoing and dedicated support to the University of Winnipeg and the broader community, Dr. Riley was awarded an honorary Doctorate of Laws in 2009. Dr. Riley.
Thank you, Paul. I'm glad I'm early because having listened to the first 2 speakers, I was thinking I was going to run out of things to say after Bob and Patrick spoke. I want to just be a little more focused on Manitoba and on sort of macro issues that relate to Manitoba and how it affects the University of Winnipeg. We all know that universities in Canada are under pressure financially. And it's not just in Manitoba, it's across the country, and they're all subject to the same dynamic, which is the fact that healthcare is gobbling up all of the additional resources that are being generated by the economy, and other areas of important public activity are suffering, and education is one of them. In Manitoba, though, we have a unique opportunity/problem, and that is that unlike other jurisdictions in Canada, we have a young population. It's fundamentally Aboriginal, but also increasingly immigrant, because we have one of the most aggressive and most successful immigration policies in Canada. That creates a whole different dynamic for our province than it does for other provinces, because when I say we have an opportunity, if you look at the statistics about engagement of young Aboriginal people in the workforce, we're not getting it. We're not getting it the way that we get it when, for example, young immigrants come in and go through the educational system and end up in the workforce. And our opportunity is to find ways to engage those young people in society in a whole bunch of different ways. If we get it right, we will be the envy of every province in Canada, because the rest of them are struggling with growth. And we've seen some good examples in Manitoba in the last couple of decades. What happens when you have growth, a demographic growth, you end up having strong economic growth. And you've seen that in the city of Winnipeg. And if you want to know why your housing prices are going up, it's because we got 10,000 more people a year coming into Winnipeg under the immigrant program that we have. It's a challenge, though, because if we don't get it right, then it's going to put huge pressure on government in areas, all kinds of areas, including healthcare, additional pressures that other jurisdictions won't have to deal with. And I recently had an opportunity to give a talk to the Manitoba Business Council, sort of 15-year retrospective, and one of the things I did was to go back and look at the statistics on where government money was being spent, and as a percentage of GDP. And what's fascinating is that education has sort of been flat to down as a percentage of GDP. Healthcare has gone, and Paul, you correct me if I've got the wrong numbers, but the gist of it is accurate, has gone from about 32% to almost 40% as a percentage of GDP. What's interesting is that there are 2 other areas where you see huge differences in terms of percentage of GDP of where we're spending our money. One that's gone up dramatically is correctional institutions. and the payment of money in the administration of justice. It's almost double what it was as a percentage of GDP. And one has gone down by almost a similar amount in terms of percentages, and that is this money we spend as a percentage of GDP on supporting families and children. It's a stunning set of statistics when you look at it. So we are in a, and if we get it right, we'll reverse those trends. If we get it wrong, those trends will get worse. And at the fundamental core, I think, of our ability to get it right, and there are lots, this is one area. There are many other areas that we all understand we have to engage with. But at the fundamental core is the ability to give young people an education. And we have, it's got to the point now where I believe that getting a university education is like a high school graduation was 10 years ago. It's a starting point. One of the stunning statistics for the University of Winnipeg, the number of students who come here, get an undergraduate degree, and then go to Red River to get special technical training. It's amazing. Lloyd knows most of the statistics, but it's a huge number because they know they need a basic undergraduate education, and then they got to get special technical skills, whatever it is, whether it's going to professional schools or getting basic training. So we need to be very conscious of that fundamental dynamic in our province as we, as a university, plan for our future. And so I look at the discussions around making things more efficient, using technology to make the university more efficient. And I've listened to what Marsha said, and I couldn't agree with you more. In some ways, that's there's nothing that replaces the ability for young people to get together in a room, have a conversation over issues that are important, hang out together in the cafeterias and the libraries where they are trying out themselves and trying to figure out who they are in an academic environment. They will not get that online. I mean, if they do, I mean, if any of you have ever watched what your kids are writing and how they write and how they speak online, it's just not, that's not how I want my kids to be raised or my grandchildren to be raised. I'd like them to have a much more fulsome ability to talk about these kinds of issues. So we need to be, and the reason we're doing that though is because we're making all kinds of adjustments and accommodations because of the fundamental funding problem that we have. And we have it, as I say, particularly in Manitoba. I believe a couple things. First of all, I believe we have a fundamental obligation to make sure that our young people get a basic undergraduate education. If we do nothing else, that's what we should do well in Manitoba. And if we feel we're spending a lot of educational resources on professional schools to train lawyers to go to Alberta or doctors to go to British Columbia, then we shouldn't be spending that money the way we do it. We should be smarter about it. We should be finding ways to, in effect, getting the places that benefit from those services to pay for it, so we can put more money into our undergraduate programs to allow and encourage young people to get access to the basic that they need. I also think one other point, and then I'll sit down because I think I've probably given enough gas on the Paul, fortunately, no longer is in government, so. The other comment I make is this, and this is really a criticism of the university. And it's always amazed me when in an institution that has so many smart people that they can be so dumb when it comes to the way in which they deal with their fundamental problems. When the University of Manitoba, frankly, is going through it right now. There's a strike vote, and I understand the problems. But what happens whenever there's a financial issue at the university, people turn inward. And they focus on each other as if the source of the problem is sitting inside the university. It's not inside the university. The source of the problem is that the university community, academics, students, staff, boards, are essentially taking it as a given that they're playing by the rules that currently exist with the government. And the real problem is you're not getting enough from the government. It's not a big enough priority. Take a page out of the book of the healthcare professions. They basically have figured out how to get money from the government. They've made it impossible not to give it. They've made it, healthcare is like the Holy Grail. Frankly, I think education is the Holy Grail. Because if we don't get the educational part right, we're not going to have the students working in an environment and creating all the kinds of economic benefits that we need in order to finance the an expensive healthcare system. So next time you worry as an institution, when you see a problem developing and you're not happy with the settlements you're getting from the university, yeah, go ahead and have your normal collective bargaining exercise, but also go down the street with the students who want to have their cake and eat it too in terms of tuition fees and the kind of quality education they want. Go down the street and stand on the steps of the legislature and ask for more. This is a natural constituency. I mean, this is a constituency that the current government, for example, counts on. And when you don't put pressure on them, they don't respond. But if you put pressure on them, nurses are a great example, you'll get all kinds of benefits. So refocus your efforts. Don't you think that would work? A little bit more. Anyway, I'll stop there, and I'm really looking forward to the rest of the presentation.
So immediately after this session is over, Sandy is going to lead us down Portage Avenue to Memorial, to the steps of the legislature and make the same speech. Thank you very much, and thank you for also broadening it out to look at provincial policy. If only we had someone to answer for that on this panel. Our next speaker is Mr. Robert Silver, who's the current Chancellor of the University of Winnipeg. And for more than 30 years, Bob Silver has made an extraordinary contribution to the business and community sectors in Manitoba at the local, national, and also the international level. He is the president and co-owner of Western Glove Works, co-owner of Warehouse One and Urban Barn retail chains. Additionally, he's the co-owner of the Brandon Sun, the Winnipeg Free Press, CanStar Weekly, and Dirksen Printers and Steinbach. In the business community, he's been involved on a number of boards, including Centreport Canada, the Business Council of Manitoba, First Peoples Economic Growth Fund, and the Winnipeg Convention Centre. In the community at large, and since its inception, actually, he's also been the co-chair of the Premier's Economic Advisory Council. In the community at large, Mr. Silver gives his time to a multitude of causes, such as the Winnipeg Library Foundation, where he helped spearhead the campaign to build the new Millennium Library, and the Grow Winnipeg initiative of the Jewish Federation. He's also a past chair of Destination Winnipeg, the United Way of Winnipeg, and presently he serves not only as the Chancellor of University of Winnipeg, but also as the co-chair of We Day Winnipeg. He's received many honors, including the university's Alumni of the Year Award and the Order of Manitoba. Mr. Silver.
The daunting task to follow such unbelievable speakers, but I'd like to bring a business context to this because my history is not with the university, it's being in business. And I see such similarities to the issues facing some businesses as they're facing the university here and universities everywhere. About technology and the need to embrace it and to use it properly, this we talk about it at the university, it's life or death in the newspaper business. It is a matter of survival. And many newspapers have taken many different ways of dealing with this. Some have said, we are a printed, this is our business, we print. That's what we do, we sell our printed version on the street, single copy or we'll deliver it to your home. Others say we're printed and we'll give you the paper, but we'll charge for the advertising. Other newspapers have said, digital first. That's what we're going to do. We're going to be digital. And those that have taken those particular positions are wrong, in my perspective. Because what they're not doing is saying what was previously said. They're not focusing on what the consumer wants. The consumer of content, and that's what newspapers supply, is content. They want both. They want to be able to access paper. They want to be able to access. It electronically, but they want content. So if the newspaper stops thinking about what the content is, they start to fail. I think Postmedia is stumbling at the moment because they're neglecting content. They're neglecting not only content nationally, but more specifically, they're neglecting local content as they rationalize their funding problems. And their fundings are all revenue. There's no government assistance for newspapers. They start to take sales managers out of local markets. They start taking editors out of local markets. They start taking publishers out of local markets. And they lose the contact with the local market. They lose the consumer, who they take for granted. So if we stop as was suggested here, thinking about what is our content and what does our consumer want. And the consumer is not just the student, the consumer is our community. The consumer is our society. If we stop thinking about what they need, we will fail. And newspapers are failing all over the place because they believe it's one or another, and forgetting what the real purpose of their business is. This university has been, and I'll further that problem, inside of the Winnipeg Free Press, the biggest problem we have, and we continue to have, is to convince ourselves that that's what we need to do. That we have journalists who say, I will give you Pulitzer Prize journalism. The consumer says, I want a picture of a dog. You have to marry these words, marry these worlds. You have to be able to provide both. The journalist that provides this incredible content that is not appreciated by the consumer has lost something. The picture of the dog loses, if that's all we do, we become one of those unbelievably horrible magazines that just has pictures. So you have to marry these worlds, but it's the consumer who will determine what content is appreciated, what content is not appreciated. And what we have to do as a newspaper is start not only looking at the content, but the people who are providing that content. The consumer tends to say, well, I hate Gordon Sinclair. I hate Lindor Reynolds. But they draw people to the content that we're providing. And universities have to start to do that as well. The professors, the people who are teaching, have to teach with a dynamism that they may not have had to do before because of the competition that's going to increase. Newspapers that lose sight of what their consumer wants and deliver it in an efficient and effective and friendly manner will go out of business. When will and some of these issues that we face in the newspaper business are pretty startling. I don't believe we will be delivering content 5 years from today in the newspaper business like we are delivering it today. We will be delivering it perhaps on a flexible piece of paper that the tablet will change, something will change, the delivery mechanism will change, and likely will not include paper, which is of great distress to me because we do own a paper mill in northern Alberta. Hopefully we can have it all paid for by the time this printed product has changed. The universities have these identical challenges. And one of the bigger problems we have at the Free Press is opening our eyes inside as to what is the effect of this. There's many journalists and many people say, oh, that'll never happen. The people who run my printing press say, that'll never happen. There'll never be the death of print. Well, there'll be a different way that we're going to deal with print. It will be much less. It may be delivered once a week. It may be delivered, I don't know what it's going to be. If I did, I'd be very much smarter than I am now. All I know is it's going to be different. And it's going to be drastically different than it is today. And we have to be ready for that change. And to Marsha's comment, being ahead of the change is no good either. Understanding the change, being in Congress with the change is very important. I can tell you that at Western Glove Works, where we make blue jeans every day, having the right color 2 years ahead of its time is no bloody good either. So I say that in fashion, timing is everything, because you have to come out with things 6 months before people think they want them. If it's 2 years, it's no good. If it's 2 years too late, it's on a markdown rack. So the timing of these changes are incredibly important. And the university that leads with its chin will get hit in the chin. We have to be smart about these changes, but we cannot ignore the fact that they're going to happen. And thankfully, the Winnipeg Free Press has got such a strong subscriber base that it's managed to maneuver its way. But this is going to change. And we'll have to accept that change, we'll have to adapt to it, we'll have to build to it, but we won't do it with closed minds. And I can tell you in the newspaper business, which you think would have the most open minds in the world, not so much. And we would think that in the university world, where is a better place to think you will have open minds? Not so much. Not so much. We think about ourselves through our history. And so if we don't start to marry these worlds and base it on content and consumer, we're going to be in trouble. And if we don't do that, and my trouble in the newspaper business, my trouble is bankruptcy. In the university world, it'll be competition to other universities because those that provide what the consumer wants win. In the jean business, the difference of $1 or $2 on a pair of pants, that part of the consumer range is not where our market is. Our market is you want to spend your money in my product because it makes you feel good, it fits good, and it's what you wanted. So I thought I would bring a business sense to this. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Bob. I think you certainly answered Sandy's challenge to not be insular in thinking about change at the university, but actually look at them as part of other changes in society. And you've also given me a bit of a tip there. I won't complain anymore about free press columnists. I'll just say they leave me indifferent. Our next speaker is Patrick Dean, who is now the president and vice chancellor of McMaster University, has been since July of 2010. And he's also, I guess off the side of his desk, professor in the Department of English and Cultural Studies at the university. He served this university as acting president from 2003 to 2004. As president at McMaster and during his time at the University of Winnipeg, he's focused on enhancing the student experience, integrating community engagement in the work of the Academy, and ensuring the continuation of a wide range of high-quality research. Dr. Dean taught English literature at the University of Toronto and the University of Western Ontario before coming to Manitoba. He subsequently served, his first appointment, I should note, was as the vice president academic at the university. He subsequently served as acting president, as I mentioned, 2003 to 2004, and was the first appointee of the newly created role of provost of the University of Winnipeg. Following this, and before his appointment to McMaster University, Dr. Dean was appointed vice principal, academic again, of Queen's University, a position he held for 5 years. Dr. Dean has published 2 books and numerous articles. He has been honored with many awards for his academic work, including the first John Charles Polanyi Prize for Literature, which he received in 1988. Dr. Dean.
Well, thanks so much, Paul. It's very nice to be here like Robin. It's really gratifying to be here and to be able to become reacquainted with so many good friends from what now I think is 9 years ago, which is quite startling to reflect on. Also like Robin, I'm amazed at this room. There's one side of me, of course, and that side is the failed actor, the failed student actor that remembers nostalgically this room as a black box theater, and actors are programmed to lament the loss of those things wherever that happens. But this is a fantastic room. And it is what the university needs right now as the venue for this kind of discussion. I want to applaud the university for this week of self-reflecting discussion, because I don't think there is a more important activity in any university at the moment than to think about our missions and what we exist to do. This brings me to, I guess, 3 threats to the university that I wanted to talk about. And initially, I have to say, 9 years out of Manitoba, I don't feel qualified to talk about the future of higher education in the province, although I would say, along with Robin, that I don't see the material challenges all that differently across jurisdictional boundaries. I was in Bologna 2 weeks ago at a conference, and European universities are going through the same issues. So it is there is a kind of global dilemma in which universities find themselves. So I think perhaps I can say a few useful things about that. There are really three challenges that I think are critically important to address for universities to prosper and survive. The first of which has to do with reaching some clarity about what we are. Everybody, it appears, these days has a conception of what universities exist to do. But so far as I can see, there's very little consensus. You know, if you read the Globe and Mail, there's Margaret Wente opining about what universities should do. There are many, many people who very adamantly take one or other position on this, and they run the spectrum from a very conservative notion of the university as a cloistered place for learning to the other end of the spectrum to university as a place for the production of individuals to go out and contribute to the growth of the economy, and nothing much beyond that. And I suppose also to generate discoveries ripe for commercialization. And I think it's really important to think about where any institution wishes to situate itself on that spectrum. There'll be local concerns. Some universities will feel, I think, rightly, a powerful obligation to their locality, and that is critical. But the overall mission, what it is we expect to be doing for students, is a really critical issue on which there isn't a great deal of consensus. What worries me the most is the extent to which, within our universities, we are co-opted by some of the terms of this discussion. It's not uncommon in one's university to hear a discourse that you're more likely to hear at government or at Queen's Park or at business conventions. So we are steadily being influenced in our conception of what the university ought to do by the babble that goes on around us. And it's really important to take time to think about that function. And here it would be related to the history of this institution, the evolving identity of this institution in the province and the city, and where that can go in the future. It'll be slightly different in every place, but I do think being clear on this is important. There's a risk of being melodramatic to talk about threats to the very existence of universities, but there are three things that I do think represent a major threat to the ongoing value of universities on the European model. This is a 900-year-old model, right? This, the particular incarnation of the university that the University of Winnipeg, or my own institution now, McMaster, follows is a model that evolved at Harvard in the late 19th century, but its roots go back to Bologna in 1050 approximately. So there are sort of enduring characteristics to that, but I think some of the things we value about universities, their autonomy, protections of academic freedom, universities as places for the cultivation of the imagination and a flexible, creative approach to the problems of the world, these things are not all agreed upon as the appropriate mandate for universities, and you can see it mirrored in the way in which funding occurs. As Robin pointed out, governments have a very simple idea of what they're funding when they provide you with the grant. And increasingly, it's true in Ontario and in many provinces, that money comes earmarked for special kinds of outcomes. And there is the big question. Are those outcomes such as the university ought to support? We have an obligation to influence public opinion. I think universities have been very slow, or at least in recent years, have been very reticent to intervene in public discourse about higher education, to the extent that now, I would say in my own province, the universities find themselves in an absurdly defensive position and lacking credibility, however admirable the principles are on which they're speaking. So that, I think, is an important challenge. I don't know whether it's more acute than other challenges, you know, that one has the tendency to think that the moment you're living in is always the most fraught with change and challenges. And I think, as is obvious from the group of people arrayed at the table over the several decades of the history of this institution, we have cycled through similar challenges over and over again. But two others, I think, bear addressing. One is the technological advance question, which a number of speakers have spoken about. And I do think it is a really important question. It's not so much that we should accept or embrace technology. The key question is, what transformation should it effect to our teaching mission? And I actually think we're still talking around the edges of that. Because to properly embrace technology potentially frees the professor up to do radically different things, either in the classroom or outside of the classroom, or in a different kind of relationship with students that may look more like mentoring. So I think there's a lot of discussion still to be had about that. I think people wonder about MOOCs as the potential death knell for universities. What I often say about that is that if the only thing that stands between us and annihilation is our legislated right to award degrees, we don't deserve to exist. So that the moment some form of technologically mediated course appears for which credit can be given from a credible institution that makes use of some interactive technology that is in some sense a surrogate for interpersonal dialogue, we are in trouble. And I'm not saying that I believe we will ever reach the point at which that is achieved. I'm saying that many other people will believe it, and this takes me back to the original point, which is that lots of people who don't know about higher education are very loud in the expression of opinions about it. So we do need to be really careful about that. The third of the threats that hasn't been mentioned yet today, and it isn't really a threat, it's a fabulous thing. These are all opportunities, and I'm going to come to the more upbeat side of my remarks shortly. This is internationalization. There is hardly a university in the world that has not run up the flag of internationalization in some way or other. The International Association of Universities has done a survey, and I think it's something like 87% of the institutions that are members of that organization have as a key part of their strategic plan the internationalization of the academy, whatever that means. And whatever that means is the key question, that universities, whether they are embedded in very circumscribed local communities or whether they are in metropolitan centers, will have to reckon with a globalized higher education milieu tomorrow. Not just in the years to come, it is already upon us. And there the challenge is complex. It's both an intellectual challenge and an academic challenge, and it's also an ethical one. If you've seen the expert panel's report on internationalization of Canadian higher education, which appeared about 2 years ago, a year and 3/4 ago, you will see one side of this. This is an account of the role of Canadian institutions of higher learning in economic development, basically. What is recommended there is the multiplication of international activities in the universities in order to bring in more visa-paying students and, I suppose, to open up markets for the products of our research. It is not a report written by educators. It is not a report written with a view to a progressive conception of global citizenship, and that is precisely the responsibility of the institutions. We do need to think about this. So, for example, whether one is opening a branch campus in another country or whether one is recruiting students to come here to study, or whether one's trying to set up research collaborations, from my point of view, it's really important that those relationships be founded on a sound ethical basis and not be purely economically driven. This is not to say that I disparage the economic benefits that can come from this, but this gets you back to the question of what a university stands for. And if we're unclear on that, the dangers of making a wrong turn on the internationalization front, I think, are considerable. So those are, I should say, the big challenge, I suppose, from internationalization, which to some extent is the same challenge we all face in addressing the needs of indigenous communities in our country, is the extent to which in our universities we're prepared to change by virtue of embracing that international community. So I'm talking here about the internationalization of the curriculum, the adoption of a global perspective in disciplines. And that does mean fundamental change to the way in which we do everything in the classroom. And I think there's a very interesting parallel, and this is really for someone from an institution that has a sometimes problematic relationship to the community of the Six Nations of the Grand. I have no particular authority to speak on this issue, but the importance of incorporating Indigenous perspectives into the life of the university is the fundamental obstacle that my own institution has not been able to overcome, and I regard it as the biggest obstacle to finding proper solutions to the scandalous position of Indigenous communities in the higher education establishment in this country. So there are three challenges. I suppose the main point I want to come to just in closing is Robbins again, and that's the business of undergrads and students and being student-centered. The Association of Universities and Colleges of Canada 2 years ago launched what we call the new narrative, and this was an attempt to shift, not to denigrate the emphasis on research in universities that has characterized kind of really the last 15, 20 years, but to add to that a rediscovered concentration on the quality of undergraduate learning. Everyone knows that for every $100,000 grant that comes into a university, the university then has to find another $40,000 to support it. And everywhere in this country, that extra money comes out of the money that supports undergraduate learning. There's a federal government program, as you all know, the indirect cost of research, which pays a portion of that. But one of the unintended consequences of the drift towards research intensiveness, which has gripped every university, whether it's the University of Toronto or Lakehead, there is a kind of knee-jerk commitment to the ideal of research intensiveness. Wherever research occurs, the same phenomenon occurs in our country. And I think the effect over 15, 20 years has been the impoverishment of undergraduate education. And I think many of the issues which our country faces, including the so-called innovation gap, can be addressed, in one sense, they can be addressed by research and development of a particular kind. But in particular, they need to be addressed by producing undergrads who have creativity, imagination, a civic sense, and a commitment to the country and its development. And there's a certain kind of education that leads to that kind of outcome. Interestingly, there was the new narrative of the AUCC about 2 months ago. The European Union issued a report on the modernization of higher education in Europe. Despite the rather ominous title, it is actually a profoundly humane document. It reasserts the importance of undergraduate learning and the importance of fostering first-rate teaching and of finding ways to link those things to a continuing high-quality activity on the research front. It's a really, really enlightened document. I probably would not have read it had I just looked at the title, but it is extraordinary. In Australia, there's a thing called the Grattan Report, which came out this September, and it's all about the importance of the quality of teaching and learning in Australian universities. So this shift towards student-centeredness, which Robin spoke about, I strongly endorse. But it's more than, it has to be more than simply being focused on students. It has to be focused on rethinking the educational process and the educational activities that we think of as worthwhile for the cultivation of great minds and the realization of potential. That's where technology may be a remarkably liberating influence upon us. In the European report, there's a very moving section which adduces all the evidence to support that learning requires face-to-face interaction. I'm greatly relieved to see that in there. So that pushes you in the direction of rethinking models of learning which combine the resources of technology, which make, I mean, it's a fabulous thing, isn't it, that people have access to information on this scale. There's nothing wrong with that. It does, however, mean that the role of the professor, the role of the institution, is going to be radically different. And this takes us to Bob's talk about how far-reaching these changes are. But I'm hugely optimistic about this, I have to say. I think the swing towards reconsidering and rebuilding the undergrad experience is one of the most encouraging aspects of the higher education scene at the moment. Sadly, it has been very difficult to sell this as a matter of urgency in Ottawa, where it's much easier to sell an argument that we need to foster our research capacity to match the 11 in Germany or the new initiative in France. But as I see it, this is the constellation of challenges at the moment within which we each operate. Where I am at the moment reminds me a lot of my time here in Winnipeg. We have local challenges that are very similar. Hamilton is a post-industrial, post-kind of manufacturing boom community, fallen on hard times, massive unemployment, a large population of new Canadians, large Indigenous population in the city. And education now has an extraordinarily important role to play. I'm with Sandy partly in suggesting that education is more critical than health, because health, here I speak now, with the authority of my medical school behind me, is in many respects a socially determined phenomenon. So without education, those positive social forces are going to be slow to foster and to exercise a positive influence. I'm really optimistic, and knowing this institution as I do, I'm enormously optimistic about the future of it, and I do think I couldn't have imagined in my years here the extent to which a constructive engagement with the community has progressed here and how much good it is doing. And I think it's very different. You know, the old model of a university as a cloister is the old model. We have a broad social obligation, but it's not the same obligation as those which, I suppose, more short-sighted views in the workplace would argue. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you, Dr. Dean. Quite a bit packed into to that last presentation. I'm particularly glad that you mentioned MOOCs, which I think are part of the new environment we talked about, and also the responsibility, as you put it, of the university to try and shape public opinion around post-secondary education. From my own direct experience, I know that the view in Ottawa is actually quite similar to the view that you'll find in Margaret Wente's columns, that the current investment in post-secondary education across the country is not yielding the kind of skills that the economy needs, and therefore that money is being wasted or is being misdirected. I don't think that characterizes the view at the provincial level, but certainly there is an issue which was also part of what Sandy Riley raised, not just the quantum allocated to post-secondary education, to education generally, but also within that amount, what are the priorities that governments will be pursuing in the future. Now, we've gotten a lot to think about from our 5 panelists, and I think also a lot to argue about and to probe more deeply into. So the floor is open. I thank them for being concise, because we actually do have some time left for questions and to get into some further issues.